Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the Leveson inquiry dominated the headlines for months, and you could be forgiven for thinking it was all done and dusted. But that was only part one. Part two, which looks into the relationship between the police and the press, has yet to start. Brian Cathcart, who co-founded the pressure group Hacked Off, which campaigns for a more accountable press, is not happy, and here's his soapbox.
The man in the anorak, hiding his face, is Mazza Mahmood, the fake sheikh, the master of the undercover tabloid sting.
The Sun journalist Mazza Mahmood, known as the fake sheikh, was jailed recently for perverting the course of justice. And as a result, his entire career of tabloid stings is under scrutiny. It's only the latest scandal involving criminality in the national press. We've seen the bribing of public officials, we've seen data theft on a huge scale, we've seen phone hacking, and we have seen the wholesale, unjustified intrusion into the lives of very often vulnerable people. Even worse than that are the suspicions, in some cases the hard evidence, that some in the press have got far too close to the police. The fake sheikh, we know, worked with corrupt police officers. The police were also very slow to uncover the full scale of phone hacking. All this is bad for our society. We need to know that these newspapers are not above the law. And they need to know it too, because they're not sorry and they haven't changed. Here I have some good news. A public inquiry into all this has been set up. It's called Leveson Part 2. It should have begun here back in 2011 when Leveson Part 1 began. But there were some pending law cases at the time. Now they're over, the decks are clear, and it can start. Now for the bad news. The government, which we all know is very close to Rupert Murdoch, doesn't want this inquiry. And so the Culture Secretary, Karen Bradley, has done something that slippery ministers very often do. She's launched a consultation. Let's not turn a blind eye to years of press corruption implicating the police. I suggest you go online to Karen Bradley's consultation on the Leveson inquiry and its implementation, that's what it's called, and let her know in clear terms that you want the Leveson inquiry Part 2 to start cleaning things up now.
And Brian Cathcart joins us now. Welcome to the programme. I mean, the initial Leveson inquiry took nearly 18 months and cost around £50 million. Do we need to go through it all again?
Well, it depends what kind of society we are. Do we sit back and watch newspaper criminality pass, as it were, unchecked? Or do we try and find out what went wrong and make sure that the public knows, and indeed that remedies are adopted? It's not about doing the same thing again. Remember, this was always envisaged, this second phase was always envisaged because they couldn't address criminality in the first phase.
No, because, as you say, there were cases ongoing for quite a long time afterwards. Is the government running shy of this? They just don't want this inquiry?
I don't know, but I hope they are, because I think it's a complete waste of time and money. I didn't think much of Leveson 1, and I think Leveson 2 will be even worse.
Why?
We've had criminal trials. Hacking is illegal. There has been £50 million spent, as you said, between Leveson and the criminal investigations. A number of journalists have had their lives turned upside down and been found not guilty of any offence. A very small number of successful prosecutions against dozens investigated and then either not charged or acquitted. There hasn't been that much criminality, and this is really an attack on the free press, basically by celebrities who don't like being caught with their trousers down.
Is that you, Brian Cathcart?
Celebrities, no. Do I look like a celebrity? No, it's not. The problem with the criminality and the trials that we've had, for example, is that let's take Rupert Murdoch's organisation for one. The bosses at Rupert Murdoch's organisation went into court and said, I had no idea this was going on. It must have been the foot soldiers. They did it. The foot soldiers went into court and said, I was only obeying orders.
But what
now, we don't have clarity on that. We don't have clarity, for example, on the rightness or wrongness of bribing public officials. So 30 public officials were sent to jail after accepting bribes from Rupert Murdoch's
But we know
organisation.
it's illegal, don't we?
But the
And that is-
journalists...
But
Nobody
we do know
went to
it,
jail.
right?
Is
But
the
we do
public
know it's
happy with
illegal,
that?
right?
This is simply wrong. Rebecca Brooks was the chief executive of News International. She was charged. She was found not guilty. The most senior British executive of the company was charged, faced the ruination of her career and livelihood, and was found not guilty.
I think her career's been all right since then.
It is normally third world countries that go after the press after they've printed stories that the famous and the rich don't like. It is not the way the British have behaved.
Have you got an agenda here that is beyond what you call proper public redress?
I am a lifelong journalist. I believe passionately in the freedom of the press. I do not believe in the freedom of the press to abuse, bully and lie about ordinary people, vulnerable people. We're not talking about celebrities here. 2/3 of the victims of phone hacking were people you would never have heard of. Many of them were people who, for example, were bereaved by crime. These are people that Rebecca Brooks's organisation saw fit to intrude on their privacy, to steal their information, to listen to their most private exchanges of information. That's just appalling.
Liz Kendall, should Leveson 2 go ahead? There was a commitment, there was a cross-party commitment to it.
This is the basic point is there was a cross-party agreement to do this. It's not just part 2 of Leveson, it's actually the Section 40 regulations to incentivise people into self-regulation. Look, it's both, if you make a promise and a commitment, that's one of the things people criticise politicians for, you should keep it. But more importantly, I think it's a mistake for Karen Bradley to do this. She's inserting herself into looking at this issue instead of an independent judge, and I think that's going to come back and haunt her.
Well, let's have a look at the Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act, because as Liz Kendall rightly says, this is another part, if you like, of what the government has been tasked to look at. Now, that would require publishers who do not join an officially recognised press regulator, Impress in this case, to pay all legal costs, regardless of whether they win or lose. Should that now be implemented with no delay?
Well, you're looking through the wrong end of the telescope. What Section 40 gives us all is a right to affordable access to justice in libel and
It's a
privacy
stick
cases.
to beat newspapers who don't want to join the official regulator.
It's a new right, a new legal right for every citizen of this country.
But the question I asked is, should they, hang on, right? But is it right though that all legal costs, and you can come back at me from the other end of the lens, as you say, but should all legal costs, regardless of who wins or loses in any case brought against a newspaper, be funded by that newspaper just because they haven't joined the state regulator?
Yes, because they would be denying you or me or whoever was the complainant access to cheap justice, which is one of the fundamental and really vital and exciting reforms delivered by the Leveson.
And that's the point. People can't afford to go up against these newspapers or proprietors, can they? And there is not a level playing field unless Section 40, which would compel, to some extent, newspapers to join the official regulator, goes ahead.
So unless you compel the press to be state-regulated, Impress is the state-approved regulator. Section 40 is a constitutional disgrace and attack on the free press. And Impress is funded by disgruntled celebrities,
And
not
is
an
that better than
independent body.
Ipsos self-regulating, newspapers
It
self-regulating?
is better to have a free and irresponsible press than to have a regulated, state-run press that is boring and responsible.
Right, well, boring in itself may not be such a terrible thing, but anyway.
Indeed. Well, this is not state regulation. Nobody could possibly make a case that this was state regulation.
Oh, yes,
Well,
it could.
this is-
Impress is backed by a royal charter. That is state regulation.
No,
Royal
it's not.
charters are the...
Impress is not backed by Royal Charter. The Press Recognition Panel is backed by
Royal Charter.
It determined on behalf of the public that Impress met the basic standards of independence and effectiveness.
Not on behalf of the
independence
public.
and effectiveness.
It
yes.
did it on behalf of the Crown. It is a
On
use of
behalf-
the Crown prerogative
in a
to
measure approved
approve
by your own
a-
party.
by a
Don't
vote
talk over
against
each other.
it. A Crown prerogative to regulate the press, to see that it's not saying rude things about some pretty shoddy celebrities. And I think that is a desperate attack on the freedom of the
Final
press.
word to you, Brian Cather. At a distance, is it not the state regulator in that sense? It may be arm's length, but it's still a state
It's
regulator.
absolutely not. The key challenge put to Leveson was to design a structure for effective independent regulation of the press that had no impact on press freedom, on the freedom of the press to, for example, criticise politicians. He did that. Parliament, every party in Parliament approved it on a one-off deal, and this government is now standing in its way on behalf of Rupert Murdoch.
Brian Cathcart, thank you.
I've been getting away with it all my